my name's Aaron Bradley, and I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati. I teach classes on design thinking, innovation, and digital storytelling. And today my guests are Mark Muenzer and Tamara Harkavy. Tamara, Mark, could you give us a little bit of background about kind of yourselves, your professional history, your affiliation with the University of Cincinnati, and kind of where you're at even today geographically?
Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. So my name is Mark Muenzer. Presently, I'm the Community Development and Transportation Director for the City of Redwood City, California. I've been the director here for a little under a year. Redwood City is located in the San Francisco Bay Area, equidistant between the cities of San Francisco and San Jose in Silicon Valley. The department is multifaceted, includes 4 divisions, which include planning, building and code enforcement, engineering, transportation, and GIS analytics. So it's a very multifaceted group spread out and primarily in our City Hall facility. I came to California about 3 years ago. I had worked in the Chicago area for 15 years. I managed the Chicago Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals for the City of Chicago under mayors Richard Daley and Rahm Emanuel. And then prior to leaving the Chicago area was a community development director in the city of Evanston, where Northwestern is located. So got a little tired of Chicago winters and decided to relocate to California. I received my degree from my master's in community planning from UC DAAP in 1999. It's a fantastic experience, still very close to many of my colleagues that I went to school with there. And also worked for a few years after graduating from DAAP with the Hamilton County Development Company in Norwood, where I kind of, became a planner, so to speak, and then moved on to Chicago and California.
So we were joking earlier too, if you're gonna have to ride out a global pandemic by sheltering in place, not bad choice of geographic locations, right?
It's
300 days of sunshine. So, I never tire of that.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm going to ask you for a job when this is over. Location.
Tamara, your interview is going on right now, whether you know or not, and it's being recorded. Yeah.
Well, it's a conversation. So I live in Cincinnati. My name is Tamara Harkavy, and I am also a graduate of DAAP with a master's in community planning in 1994. And when I graduated, I was so lucky to get a job with Downtown Cincinnati Incorporated, DCI. So I also have a sort of a view towards economic development and urban revitalization, but with a different lens. So I worked at DCI for a while, but had an opportunity to go to Chicago and saw a program there called Gallery 37. And I love this linkage because I know you'll know it, right?
Yep.
And Gallery 37 was on Block 37 of Chicago, across from Marshall Fields and a bunch of shopping in a block that was having trouble being revitalized.
That's an understatement, but go ahead.
Weisberg, and there was this amazing woman named Lois Weisberg who had the most incredible idea. So she started a youth employment program, and they put, long story short, because I could talk about how beautiful of a job they did and the investments they made in this program called Gallery 37. We went to see this program in 1995 with the mayor of Cincinnati and the Cincinnati Youth Collaborative and other folks. Saw it, understood that it was youth employment in the arts. It was a way to bring vibrancy to the streets. It was an economic development tool. It solved so many problems. Youth unemployment, first and foremost. And we just said, hey, let's do this in Cincinnati. So I was working for DCI. I left that job and started Artworks, which I just say we Cincified it. We took what Chicago did so brilliantly and we created our own thing. And along the way, we were job training and employment. And then along the way, we grew to become a cornerstone of public art for the city. We've turned our city into a gallery. We've done other kinds of public art events. And I resigned as the founder at the beginning of March. So
Wow.
talk about the what we did in the rearview. I don't know. I do know a little bit about where Artworks is going today and how they're tackling the pandemic, but I'm super interested in figuring out, we did this thing called Blink, Mark, and Blink was the largest public art event, 4 days free. It was all about illuminating downtown and northern Kentucky, and 1.5 million people came down. Are we going to do it again? How are we going to do that? What's going to be different? That use of public space. So this is awesome.
So I know of Blink. My family, my brother and his daughters and another one of my niece still live in Cincinnati or Cincinnati area. And my brother lives out in, past Milford, and doesn't, comes in the city a fair amount of time, but could not have, just the images and the videos he sent from Blink and how cool it was. And, that it was just connecting with, the region at large and bringing them into the central city. So congrats.
Nice to hear. So we get, like you, we get to rethink things, although we don't have 360 days of sunshine.
It's 300. It's not 360. It does rain on occasion.
Okay. 65 degrees. Jacket weather, right? Okay.
It's amazing. I have become a weather wimp within 3 years. I mean, today it was, I was walking the dog and it was like 55 or something. And I was, sweatshirt and a hoodie, and the dog didn't want to go. And the dog who was raised in Chicago. So it happens quick.
Your blood thins pretty quickly once you spend a little time there, huh?
Indeed.
Well, I think you both kind of told us a little bit about your backgrounds enough that gives us a window into the role that innovation and collaboration and creativity played pre-pandemic. But maybe are there a few things that really had to zero it into, the role that innovation and collaboration and things that are a lot harder to do now, the role that they played in your world before the pandemic, just to kind of help us understand the baseline of how those tools affected your day to day?
I'll jump in. Prior to the pandemic, it's Redwood City is an organization of hundreds of staff, many of which are located in the City Hall facility where my department is located. And it was, even though in Silicon Valley and the birthplace of technology and the home, Redwood City is the headquarters of Oracle. Next door, where I worked before in Menlo Park, is Facebook headquarters, Google, Apple, etc. Even though you're surrounded by all of that technology, really those companies are not built on remote working. I mean, they pre-pandemic were all about collaboration. We're all about these open floor plans where you got as many folks as you could into one space, and they were having these conversations in the hallway and in the communal kitchens and next to each other at their very close, desks. And, government started to replicate that. And we started to go into this, more open floor plan, and everything was happening predominantly in the building. We had some remote working here and there mainly for planners and people who had night meetings, to more flexible schedule than remote working, but some remote working, but certainly not where we're at today. Right. And it was all about everybody being here and in my office or in a conference room, and that's how everything took place. The big open building that's open 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. So that was the model we were at, despite our location. I can go a little bit into it. I've always been one in the interest of work-life balance and recruiting and retaining talent, particularly as you get into younger generations. It's always been a big focus of mine that remote work and remote operations needed to be a part of our ultimate future. And I've always been an advocate for it and have always tried to introduce it when appropriate. What I would often run into is when you have building inspectors, permit technicians that work a front counter, infrastructure inspectors, those positions, just aren't built for remote working. And so there was how are we going to handle that? How are we going to, if we remote part of our staff and give them that quote unquote privilege or perk, if you will, how are we going to handle it for the folks that can't do that? And so that was really pre-pandemic. That was a lot of our conversations, and how we handled it, and probably how we will handle it ultimately, is that's when we started to do like what's in California pretty common called a 9/80 work schedule, where you work 80 hours over 9 days, and typically you have every other Friday off. So when you have field staff, that's a way to accommodate them, and possibly a way that we'll look to go forward. But I will say, and I know we'll get into this in a little bit, pandemic and post-pandemic, it turns out a permit technician can review electronic plans at home. We do require everything to be submitted digitally now. All building permit applications, planning applications, all the review goes back and forth electronically. So we got pushed like everybody else, and it turns out we could do a lot more than we thought we could. So I can expand upon that, more.
Yeah, that's a theme that I feel like we're starting to uncover through conversations we're having with this series, and even just informal conversations or podcasts that I'm listening to, where we talk a lot in design and creativity about the need for constraints sometimes in order to drive real innovation. And it feels like you're describing yet another example of, well, without that being a forced constraint, nobody ever wanted to bother to look around for a way to maybe do something differently. But now you've been forced into a constraint, and look what you found as a result.
Right. And I mean, even up to the top, it's a governmental organization. It's led by a city council, and have a city council that meets virtually, that meets via Zoom. So from the top of the organization was just a quick shift from all of our operations. So
You're shaking your head, Tamara. What do you think?
Oh, it makes me shudder. And it's also okay, but we will figure it out, and we're going to have to rebuild our cities and our public spaces to accommodate for this. And cities are out of money, except in Redwood City, where you have Silicon Valley at your feet. So you're probably in a fortunate position as you rethink systems and interaction.
I mean, we're maybe not experiencing it to the same degree, but we'll have revenue impacts, absolutely, and we're going to have to modify our operations. But I think it's a very valid point that as we're trying to evolve and change the whole organization and become much more remote, that's an expense. And now's the time when we're really starting to feel a pinch, and who knows how long that's going to last. The Bay Area instituted the first shelter-in-place orders in the country, and has thankfully had some fairly positive results from that, and probably will be one of the last to relax them. I mean, we're just now beginning to have those conversations 58 days in, so that has real economic impact.
Of course it does, and it's changed our whole environment. But the way that an organization like Artworks gets work done is through face-to-face. I mean, we have teams of creatives side by side, sometimes on scaffolding, sometimes in studios and workspaces. And there's a whole new way to rethink that as well. The idea of virtual creativity without thinking about human interaction, face-to-face interaction is really like the Wild West right now.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. I like that analogy. What do you mean when you say that, and what do you think emerges from that?
Well, that's what I'm thinking about a lot now, because if you take something like Blink and you say, all right, here's this 1.2 million, 1.5 million people show up. You've engaged 200 artists. You have every storefront open. Every bar and restaurant is open. Parking lots are in the periphery are full. So you are doing so many things at one time. with an event like that, or even in artworks where there's kids working on scaffolding, painting murals, and the public is invited into this to watch, to interact. And then the leave behind is something that people look for. It becomes part of the backdrop of the urban fabric, and it is economic development. So if you think about those activities differently, does Blink become something that is only virtual? It's the technology that's enabling us some days to be successful. The parks, how do you go out into a park now? Where do you wash your hands? Where do you go to the bathroom? How do you distance yourself? We're going to have real challenges to that. And I think the urban planning world it's a huge opportunity. Public health is a huge opportunity to partner with lots of innovative thinkers to figure this out.
I think it is a big opportunity. I mean, similarly, we're all about, on the planning side, gathering neighborhoods and communities, and ultimately in a city council chamber to talk about some really impactful long-range development projects and plans. And we're not going to be able to operate that way for the foreseeable future. So our planners have totally, we have just a fantastic team of planners here in Redwood City, and have completely engaged with how do we do this virtually? How do we, and also keeping in mind a very important equity lens. Not everybody has the ability to jump on this call or this presentation with their laptop and has the Wi-Fi and the infrastructure to do this. So how do we move into a virtual video engagement while bringing along all members of our community, which is, so important for us? And then conversely with the spaces, what we're looking at right now is allowing restaurants to spill into the streets and into the parking lots and onto the sidewalks, which already happens to a great degree. But what can the city do to facilitate that if the tables have to be 6-10 feet apart? City has a lot of ability to assist with that. Now, there's a ton of logistics that have to do with that. Again, to the aforementioned weather, it helps a lot when you've got that on your side. But summer is summer, so we gotta react, and gotta react quickly. So
summer is summer.
Yeah, I think you're touching on some interesting things too there that also transcend not just the experience of the people who go to participate in watching something, but even the people creating it. Like when I think about Blink and even artworks, really the role that they've played in the lives of a lot of young people in Cincinnati and a lot of artists who then are mentors and coaches, it's not just about the physical finished thing that people experience as viewers of it, but a lot of the real power in that is what happens to the people who get to be participants in creating it together, and physically gathering and meeting people from the other side of town or another community, and getting your hands dirty on the same thing together at the same time. And regardless of access to resources, even that becomes really difficult. It's just different.
Well, it's difficult too, because the upside, you're so right, these kids who are working together, generations of them have come up, and their connectivity now, the networks that have been formed, the sort of cohorts, if you will, that remain part of their lives. And I don't know that that's going to happen, or we don't have the muscle yet for that to happen digitally, virtually, remotely. We have maybe the technology, but we're not quite sure how to interact with that. And that human interaction is the way that we learn and innovate and grow and connect with each other. I can't imagine that's going to go away. And it won't. We will work through ways to make these things possible. It might take a while.
Yeah.
But there's putting restaurants, expanding bike lanes, closing entire lanes of streets and letting diners spill out into the open air. It's all very romantic, but it creates some economic domino effects for restaurants and other businesses, and then thus creative. So there's that gig economy that has to be rethought. The way artists work has to be, and how they connect with each other, what businesses will want. And just one more thing, it's like there are businesses all over the city of Cincinnati that would love to engage and employ artists and youth, but maybe differently now. If there's even any enterprise available for that. You're shaking your head, Mark.
No, I mean, I agree. I think that, I mean, we will get on the other side of this. I mean, there will be,
Absolutely.
it will be a new normal. It may be a year, it may be 2 years, but I mean, we're having all those conversations now. Actually, I don't think it does sound all that romantic as we sit here now because, you're going to be wearing a mask and you're not going to be talking to the table next to you and you can't eavesdrop on their conversation. And then you and your,
Well, you can, but
you can, but it's going to be very, very obvious. And, and then the other thing too, like, is restaurants are surviving on takeout right now and carry out. And even when the orders are relaxed, a lot of people are going to be like, no, I'd rather just go pick something up and maybe hang out with the neighbors or with my kids or whatever. And now we've closed the streets down. So it's a double-edged sword. It's like, well, how do we accommodate both this now, fairly vibrant pickup delivery business with getting people back out in the community? But I totally concur that, in my world too, decisions are ultimately made by really being in the same room and listening to the community, and then ultimately the decision makers listening to one another. And yes, that can happen via this realm, but there's just you take breaks in the conversation and you chat with somebody in the audience and they put something in your mind like, oh geez, I hadn't considered that. Maybe if they do move the entrance over onto this street and lower it by a couple stories, that will have less of an impact on this community that has so much concern. I mean, those types of things, they happen in person. And that's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to replicate in this type of environment.
Can I say something? Like you're at the beginning of how a neighborhood changes or regenerates or interacts. That's like that's your job. You're trying to figure out a whole new way of functioning as society. As you're building neighborhood engagements out and listening to the myriad of ideas coming or needs or wants coming from a community, right? And I think that's incredibly exciting because the community is going to help us solve these problems. I'm so fortunate. It seems like you are too. I'm not sitting somewhere with no access or in a tiny little apartment and not able to kind of have a world around me. But those communities in which we're working, especially in the inner cities and marginalized neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods, they've got something to say. They've experienced this very differently than we have. So you're in a great situation in what you're about to, the new frontier for you guys.
Well, I mean, I have loved what I have done ever since the first day I entered DAAP. I had a brief career in sales and marketing for a large Fortune 500 company prior to becoming a city planner. And I remember the whole time thinking, well, I can't do this the rest of my life. Like, this just does not interest me. And I have to do something that I can be passionate about and have it be more of a vocation than a career. I've been fortunate that I've been somewhat successful on the career side, but I truly do think of it and would say, regardless of if I was having this conversation or not, I truly do think of it as partly a vocation and just a calling. And I'm comfortable in spaces where there's disagreement, and I like being a liaison, and I like hearing both sides and advising ultimately the decision makers. So it is a very, Tamara, I totally agree that this pandemic, at first was talked about how like it was a great equalizer and how it, the population, the world's population really was experiencing it the same way. And it's just as we get more and more into it, less and less through, both from a health standpoint and also from an equity standpoint and a resources standpoint. So when you're in my position, I mean, that's all part of the conversation.
I think we totally have to rethink it. I think public health, public spaces, public access and public engagement, transportation, all of those things, and technology, of course, that's what I mean by the wild, wild west.
Bringing it around there, yeah. And I think something else that you're all touching on that I've experienced and am challenged by too is this sort of paradox of opportunity, but yet the restriction from being able to fully take advantage of it. When I think about design research and ethnographic research, which then would probably also transcend into even community-based research and appreciative inquiry and all of these things. You kind of do need to be able to get together with those people to really not just listen to the words they say on a recording over the phone or what they type or write down. You need to be able to be close to them and hear them, let them hear each other. And the irony of it is that we have this situation that would force us to think about doing things differently. And it's a great time to get that kind of research and talk to those communities. Yet we really can't physically do it in that way. So we also have to then turn around and rethink how to even do it. I had a research assistant hired for this summer through the honors program at the university, and we had this really cool idea of this multidisciplinary research project looking at the future of work and how work-life integration would start to change for Generation Z. And all of the research that I was really going to have this student help me with was going to be ethnographic listening sessions and sitting with people and talking through them. Thankfully, because of how some things worked out with the timing and the financing and everything, I still have this student to work with this semester, but we're completely rethinking how I can even have her engage in primary research like that. And I just, it's disappointing and a reality that we're all working through of like, well, this is the time to actually engage our community, but we can't in the way we thought we would, right? So how do we do that now?
Yeah, I mean, Redwood City got the go-ahead from the city council after some community input to totally redo its downtown plan. Very fortunate in the last 10 years, it experienced a ton of development that created, really, I would argue, one of the most vibrant downtowns in the Bay Area. And there were starting to become some concerns that the development had happened, legitimate concerns in some respects, that was happening too quickly and that the traffic and other quality of life impacts were starting to impact more established neighborhoods in the city. And we needed to have a big community conversation about that. We got everybody, and got the go ahead, and it was all going to be built on, in-person speaker series, design charrettes, getting out into our neighborhood associations and walking around the different neighborhoods when we're trying to develop new design guidelines and zoning. All of that, the whole process was pretty much based on, of course, there would be online surveys. Of course, there would be ways to digitally view things. But, all of a sudden it was, not only is there the economic impact, so we have to keep that in mind, but now that whole premise has been, upended. And that goes back to what I was talking about before in terms of, it was pretty quickly that we realized that we were going to have to engage in a different way. But at the same time, how were we going to get to all members of the community in that way? Because if you can balance it between digital and in-person events, that's typically historically how you handled it. And now you can't have in-person events.
There's an organization in Cincinnati, and I think they're going to be working in other cities as well. It's called CoHere. And it's business, but their job has been to work in communities with people who would not necessarily have access to you, Mark, as they're planning to redevelop the town center in Avondale or areas over the Rhine or wherever they are. And or it's even transportation conversations. So the director of transportation or Metro in Cincinnati. And they have become really adept at pulling together unique individuals to sit around a table and work through some of these challenges and have a voice where they wouldn't normally have had a voice. And And I have a meeting next week. I'm curious to hear how Donnie has switched to a remote platform or virtual platform and still allow for access, and what kind of things are coming out of there. How innovation might really be sparked by COVID and needs, or a whole different experience for people, for individuals. So a lot of urban centers like yours have had the great fortune of these economic revivals, and those problems were the good problems to have. There's no parking, it's too crowded, you got to wait an hour to get a table, people are spilling out of bar. That's great for cities, and it made a dangerous place safe, right? I mean, over the Rhine, all of us have been down there. Those were huge investments that we've made in our community. And we're on the road to trying to solve those problems. I think we're going to turn around and figure out we have to have new kind of Main Street partnerships for economic development, differently than we've done in the past.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Over the Rhine. Every time I'm back in Cincinnati, I've stayed there the last 2 times when I've been back visiting family. And just, by the time I left Cincinnati in 2002, and what it is today is I don't know if I've ever seen a transformation like that so quickly, understanding that maybe not everybody is, all that thrilled about it when you're talking about displacement and issues like that. But in terms of vibrancy, in terms of what has been created, in terms of streetscape, I think it's amazing. But what I wanted to discuss is, Redwood City used to be called, not that long ago, Deadwood City. And it within the last 10 to 15 years has, totally reshaped itself, largely due to really good long range planning and, of course, a good economy. But, as we sit here right now, even a mid-sized city in a metro area such as Redwood City, we're really, really curious as to what is our future. As there's concerns with density, as there are concerns with people no longer, our Caltrain, which is the main transit system that runs down the San Francisco Peninsula, is running at 5%. I mean, it's literally losing millions of dollars every month. And even when it does come back, you're going to have legitimate concerns about riding transit.
Are you seeing any uptick in public transportation in certain parts of your city where people are taking a bus to work because they are the people who are on the front lines and they're living in neighborhoods that are over here and have to get into your core? Are you seeing an uptick in public transportation use in areas?
No, I mean the reversal in ridership is a little less on the bus lines because they do reach further away from the core and the downtown center. They are more tangential in terms of their routes. So, but it's still been significant. And at the end of the day, it's California, so it's it's a car culture, and there had definitely been a movement as of late to public transit. I live in downtown San Jose. I walk 5 minutes to the Caltrain station and I take a bullet train to Redwood City, and I'm here 30 minutes later, and I can work or I can not work. I can listen to music. I can, talk to friends, what have you. I do that purposefully. And there had been, particularly in San Jose and Sunnyvale, which is another city, Palo Alto, Redwood City, a lot of building up in the core around these train stations, and finally a recognition that there was a lot of positive aspects to density, while certainly not, it had its detractors too. So it will be very interesting to see what happens in a place like California that was based on the car and is still greatly a car commuting culture. One thing I will say quickly is I'm very fortunate. I have a beautiful view of the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it has never been clearer than it has in the last 2 months. I'm just amazed, just on a very practical level, that how in 8 weeks effectively what that has done to air quality. And I'm sure that's across metro regions, but I am just like, I never knew there was a ridge on that mountainside. Like, it was just one big blob from my window. And it's just, I do think it'll be interesting, that part of it, particularly a place like California, in really any city that has a large car commuting population, if there will be any recognition of, wow, that was really quick. Like those climate goals and that air quality changed really quick, and particularly a city like a progressive city like Redwood City that has really aggressive climate action plan and goals. That that's all part of this conversation that I'm having internally with my group about not only does it make sense remote working for public health as in the situation we're in now in terms of work-life balance, in terms of being a attractive place to work, it also relates very clearly to a lot of larger policy goals related to GHG emissions and climate action plans and who we really want to be, and understanding not everybody can take a train. Some people absolutely have to drive to work, and of course that's understandable, but this isn't just about the city workforce. This is about how do we best model the place that we want to be, and the environment is something that's very important.
There's a co-op employer that we have through DAAP in the university that's a photographer out in Las Vegas, and he specializes in aerial photography, mostly of architectural features. So a lot of his work is drone footage or even helicopter footage, and it was so interesting because I'm on his marketing list because of relationship through co-op, and I got an email from him last week that was a marketing thing saying, this has never been a better time to take aerial footage of our city. If you want to pre-book or pre-order, I'm shooting now, and you can, for no money down, sort of tag your ideas of places I would want to potentially shoot for you, because a city like that has nonstop packed main strip there,
Right.
and everybody commuting to and from the suburbs to do their jobs has just literally been turned off, right? And so as a resident, he's seeing his city through a new lens, and then also the marketing materials that he can create.
Yeah, but that's a silver lining to the environmental impact, that you can see it so quickly that it's really, I hope, is because we've cut driving down, we've cut our, we're not flying airplanes as much as we were. There's so many changes that are having a positive impact on the environment. It makes me think, like, in terms of policy, Mark, if there could be a reinvestment policy for creatives, for cities, yeah, I'm going to say not a Green New Deal, but like the New Deal. If cities can and government can figure that out, I think we have an opportunity to reemploy a workforce of creatives, to readapt our cityscape, to look differently and function differently. But I think it's a policy thing, and I think it starts with governments, local economies, maybe state.
Absolutely. I mean, we're focused on, making sure that our projects, our infrastructure projects, are what we call shovel ready. And it's a very complicated process that, to be shovel ready, this is actually the first time I've overseen an engineering and transportation group. And of course, I was cognizant of their work in my other capacities and my other jurisdictions, but I never had an appreciation for the complexity of what it takes in terms of design, and to get ultimately to construction on a water main project or a sewer main or a water tank or what have you. But we're really focused, to your point, we're really focused right now in making sure that when we're on the other side, and what we hope is, external funding sources in addition to the city's funding sources, that's how we're, and it's not just city workers, of course, it's all the consultants that we employ, and the general contractors that are involved in construction. I mean, all of that is really important to the Green New Deal. Hopeful that they're as green as possible, but there's always a balance there. There's also cost.
Of course, I'm just saying,
and
as a tool for reinvestments in our city now, and you're going to make policy and decisions in transportation and even access to capital. All of that is going to change. It has changed and is going to change even more. And I think that's what I find exciting. Aaron, I don't know if y'all are talking about that at UC even, because you do so many projects and so many urban design and redesigns, but um, the virtual landscape and the remote landscape and the digital landscape are all going to play a factor in this right now, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually an interesting funding opportunity right now through one of our programs called UC Forward, which is where I teach a lot of my classes through. And UC Forward is bringing together transdisciplinary projects that solve actual problems. So we moved from the theoretical into, this is going to be a class or an experience that focuses on a real thing that's happening. And a lot of times those things that are happening have to involve ambiguity so that there's not just a very set, like, here, you're our client, we'll design this for you. It needs to sort of bring us into a how might we solve this kind of space. And so actually right now there's a call for proposals that a lot of us are working on for creating faculty collaborations to work on projects that would actually create job opportunities for students to be a part of redeveloping and sort of establishing urban resilience in the midst of the pandemic. So there's enough freedom to choose what path that would look like and propose something interesting, but intentionally making us all think about, well, how do we advance the work that we need to see happen, but also create an educational experience out of it and involve these students who are going to they're going to graduate out into and live in the world that
they are inheriting, right? They are. So are you affiliated with 1819 at all right now with any of this stuff?
Yeah, so actually one of the courses or experiences that I'm doing this summer that was a direct result of the COVID pandemic was we were looking at ways to try and move some of the innovation and creativity in co-op employment even that would have happened out in the community or out in the world, still make things like that happen in the midst of what we're experiencing. So I created an experience called the Virtual Innovation Studio, where we're partnering with various different companies or community organizations who gave us sort of this open-ended prompt of, how might we do this in light of what we're experiencing? And then we work together with them to kind of refine that into a project brief. And then we have, cross-disciplinary groups of students who are doing a series of 5-week sprints using innovation and design thinking to kind of tackle what those problems might look like and then present back those opportunities. So a couple of the partners that we're working with are actually tenants of 1819, and we're collaborating with them. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we kind of start to transition as we move towards a close. We've sort of kind of danced around some of these things that you're all thinking, but as we look to the future, given the information we have now, this is an ever-changing situation, and when we talk about what normal is or will be, it's probably not returning back to what was before. What are some of your bold predictions of how to look after this as a result of what we're learning about creativity and collaboration and innovation and all those things that we've been talking about today?
You gonna go, Tamara?
Oh, I will put on my rose-colored glasses and I'll that virtual space is going to become a big player in social interactions, and that we're going to have to rethink how we build our cities and our core gathering places for a period of time. If we had a crystal ball and this was only 2 years and then we're going to all be fine, great, but there's going to be the next pandemic. So it's fundamentally changed the way we think about things. And I think public health is going to lead the way that we interact and design cities and go into our workplaces and have meetings. And
I would say I agree.
we'll make it pretty. We'll make it look good.
I want to put on my rose-colored glasses. A couple comments. I mean, I think we're fortunate probably where we sit that public health does lead the way, and it should lead the way. I'm not sure that's the case everywhere, and that's unfortunate. So, but where I sit, it leads the way, and so we'll follow that direction. I do think cities will be different regardless of the duration of COVID to a vaccine. Certainly during the interim period of time before that happens and post. I don't think that cities are going to operate in terms of the way they design their open spaces as they did before, though I do think they'll still play a role in a community's health. That there's these gathering places, there's probably just going to have to be, at least for the here and now, restrictions on numbers, and both in terms of people, in terms of number of events. in terms of PPE and the safety protocols that are all in place. I mean, that's just going to be part of our new reality. And then the other thing is, I mean, I don't remote working, government or private sector. I mean, that genie is out of the bottle. And maybe the genie, probably in my mind, should never have been in the bottle. But so how do we now handle that? You know, again, it's an equity issue. It's an infrastructure issue in terms of all the communications. And then just, you know, how do we all operate that way? And, you know, I've been reading more about flipped offices or whatever concept you want to talk about, where you're just like much more strategic about when you're with people and when you're having meetings. You're not coming to City Hall just randomly to work for 8 hours. You're being strategic about it, and you're meeting with so and so, so and so, and so and so, and then you're going back home and making sure that that you have the equipment that you're able to do that. And then the third thing I would say is the positive, which we were talking about before, which is the climate, which is the environment, which is reduced travel, but that can't last forever. And I am concerned about public transit, both in the time of COVID and after COVID, and how do we make sure that it's viable? And I don't think it's doomsday as we sit here right now with such reduced riderships and such impacts of transit systems, but there's going to have to be a lot of thought put into, you know, once people already were hesitant in a lot of places to take public transit. This certainly doesn't help matters, and that's key to the vibrancy of most cities.
I think this is a continuum, right? Because we're on the so to speak bus or the train, and it's moving. And we hope. So I think, and cities have different challenges depending on the scale of the city and populations and their population makeup and the density. So, I mean, I agree with that. In the near future, as we're moving across this continuum, shutting down streets and encouraging rider pathways for bikes and other kinds of active transportation, I think will gain in popularity. Outside dining, because fortunately it's the summer and maybe we'll figure out whether, I mean, those things can be cool to reconnect people with the city. But as that continuum goes on, I'm going to want to go to New York City, but how do I ride a subway? Or how do I go to the theater? Or, you know, I've seen some beautiful performances, digital performances of ballet and music. It's incredible, emotional, it takes you there, but it's not what the human connectivity needs and the changes. And we will figure it out. Virtual reality, I don't know. Is there going to be more access to that? Is that going to be our new normal?
I mean, it's definitely going to play a bigger role. I totally agree with you, though. Like, it's not the same as being in a theater and being around people and feeling their reaction to a performance, to a movie, to whatever it is, you know. So I also, the people that work with me, they're probably getting sick of this, me saying this, is I'm also big, like, let's not define a crisis while we're in the crisis. Like, we're in the crisis. We all know that, you know, you're right, the train's moving with us and we got to figure this out. But there's time, as with a lot of things, helps. And it will help with this situation too. You know, we will continue to hopefully have more testing and putting the things in place that we need to manage this crisis. And that will dictate a lot of how we move forward in terms of planning for our cities and interacting in our cities. And that's hard to do, you know, 2 months in and pretty much the Groundhog Day effect of this whole thing is wearing on people. And I get that. But I think that, you know, hopefully, you know, as June rolls through and July and we get, you know, just a better idea of what the world is, we'll be able to plan for it better.
That's I love that soundbite there. Like, let's not define a pandemic while we're in the middle of it, right? That's good. Yeah. Well, was there anything else that either of you wanted to mention before we sort of wrap this up? I think we covered a lot today.
No, I mean, I am, thank you for this opportunity. Again, I say it regardless of if I'm on here or not. You know, my DAAP experience was so cool, and I'm not intending for this to be a commercial, but it equipped me so well for what has been an okay career. So thank you.
Yeah. So that's a good benefit of this pandemic, is that reconnection and meeting somebody new, and
Yep.
through DAAP and through that alumni network. So yeah, thank you. Well said, Mark.
Yeah. Well, thank both of you, Tamara, Mark. Thank you for your time. Thanks for the things
Welcome.
that you're doing in your respective roles and within the cities and the communities you're in. And just thanks for giving us some time and thought to what the world might look like. You know, we look forward to seeing it together with you and reflecting on it too. So, and a big thanks to Cincinnati Bell for making all this possible too. You know, this was another great example of innovation being driven out of something unexpected. So we're thankful for that chance too. So,
Thank you, Aaron.
yeah.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.